I recently got a comment from one of my subscribers named Jesus Christ is not God, and in one of the comments on he wrote a comment on one of my videos asking me to do to make a video, and this is what he said. He said this a week ago. He said Jesus Christ is not God. Said make a video on how to study and research Sirah of Prophet and how to deal with fabricated stories in books of Sirah like Ibn Ishaq, Al-Tabari, Ibn Ishaq, Al-Waqidi, and Muqtal ibn Sulaiman. All right, so I'm just going to make a video on how to deal with the books like Ibn Ishaq, Al-Waqidi, Ibn Sa'd, and Al-Tabari. I'm not going to be talking about Muqtal ibn Sulaiman. I think ibn Sulaiman wrote tafsir, or a commentary on the Quran. So commentaries. All right, I'll just talk briefly about tafsirs, or commentaries of the Quran. Commentaries of the Quran, when they have hadith in them, usually those hadith aren't correct or they're not authentic, because there's no chains of transmissions in those hadith, or in those hadith found in the tafsir literature or in the commentaries of the Quran. So if there's a hadith about Prophet Muhammad in Ibn Abbas, in Tafsir Ibn Abbas, Tafsir Muqtal ibn Sulaiman, I think that's what he's referring to, or if there's a hadith about Prophet Muhammad in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, Tafsir al-Tabari, etc., most of the time those hadith are fabricated or they're weak. Anyways, because Muslim scholars like Ibn Kamal, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, etc., have said that the tafsirs don't have chains of transmissions or isnads in them. That means uh, it makes the hadith in those tafsirs automatically false or weak or not authoritative. So tafsirs are weak anyways. They're not authentic. Uh, they're weak sources anyway. Muslim scholars don't accept them. They're not authoritative to Muslims. So that's all I'll say about the tafsirs. If he's talking about a book, the book Muqtal ibn Sulaiman wrote, I'm not familiar with it. If you want to clarify Jesus Christ is not God, in another video, in another comment section of a video of mine, you can do that. So I think you're talking about tafsir, so that's why I'm talking about that. Regarding Ibn Ishaq, Al-Waqidi, Ibn Sa'd, and Al-Tabari, I'll go to Ibn Ishaq first. So basically, I bought Ibn Ishaq's book, right? I bought this like a few years ago. So you don't even have to go to outside sources, to show that this book is not authoritative, or it's a weak source anyways. If you go to the introduction section on page 36 and page 37, there are a bunch of scholars who have said that Ibn Ishaq is not authentic, or it's not a strong source. Anyways, scholars like Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Al-Nisa, Yahya ibn Sa'id, uh, Malik ibn Nas, Abu Dawud al-Talasi, uh, Yahya ibn Qattan, uh, Abdullah ibn Noir, etc., etc. So there are many early Muslim scholars who have said that Ibn Ishaq is not reliable. Anyway, so Ibn Ishaq's it's not an authentic source according to Ibn Ishaq's book himself. So if you read Ibn Ishaq's book, most of the time he gives no chain of transmission. Most of the time he'll just tell the story without providing a full chain of transmission, going back to either one of the companions of Prophet Muhammad or Prophet Muhammad himself. So that automatically makes the stories not authentic, because everything except the Quran needs a isnad in order for it to be authentic or not. Not everybody was honest back in the early days of Islam. That's why the disciples of Muhammad, Abu Bakr and Umar and Khattab, developed the isnad, or the chain of transmission, to verify whether what the Prophet Muhammad was saying was true or not. The only book that doesn't have an isnad is the Quran, because we know the Quran came from Allah to Angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, and Prophet Muhammad recited it to the early Muslims, including his companions. So there was no isnad needed for the Quran, but there was a isnad or chain of transmission needed for every other source of every other source of Islam, Hadith books, tafsir, Sirah books, or biography books, etc., etc. So I'll just give you one example of how like Ibn Ishaq just says whatever without providing a chain of transmission. I'll just pull out a random story here. It says on Ibn Ishaq, page 387, and I'm reading from the second paragraph. It says, the people searched for their dead, and the apostle said, according to what uh, Muhammad ibn Abu al-Rahman bin Abu Salasa Manzari, brother of uh, bin al-Najjar, told me. So, so basically he says, according to, right? He doesn't give any kind of specific chain of transmission going back, definitively going back to the Prophet Muhammad. He just says, according to, um, you know, then he says, they told me, and then on the third paragraph, he says, I've been told that the apostle went out seeking Hamza and found him at the bottom of the valley. So basically, on the third paragraph, Ibn Ishaq says, I've been told. That's it. He doesn't bring any kind of chain of transmission. He doesn't say, according to this person, and this person, this person, this person, and this person heard it from the Prophet Muhammad, and therefore the story is true because there's a source going back to the Prophet Muhammad. No, Ibn Ishaq just randomly tells a story, and this is found in the third paragraph, where, again, on Ibn Ishaq, page 387, he just says, I've been told that the apostle. So Ibn Ishaq is doing no fact checking here. He's just writing down what he's been told without fact checking whether his sources were accurate or not accurate. So that's generally why Ibn Ishaq mostly is not authentic or is not authoritative. So you might be asking, well, if Ibn Ishaq is not authentic, what is? And that would be this book, Ibn Hisham. So Ibn Hisham basically edited out, or he took out a lot of weak stories found in Ibn Ishaq, like the satanic verses, etc., etc. So Ibn Ishaq, this is like a bridge version. This isn't the entire volume set. So this is just a bridged version. This isn't like the true authentic version. Uh, I have this book, In the Footsteps of the Prophet, Lessons from the Life of Muhammad by Tariq Ramadan. So I have this book, So now notice, now Tariq Ramadan did a good job in fact checking his sources or doing research on the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And, he quotes, he doesn't quote Ibn Ishaq, rather, he quotes Ibn Hisham al-Sirah al-Nawawi. So basically, this is a 6-volume set. There's a 6-volume set here. Ibn Hisham is a 6-volume set. I'm trying to see. Where his bibliography is. No, there's no bibliography here. But again, if you get this book, In the Footsteps of the Prophet, Lessons from the Life of Muhammad, from Tariq Ramadan, he was a Swiss Muslim scholar. He doesn't quote Ibn Ishaq, and the reason why is because he knows Ibn Ishaq is not authentic anyways. He quotes Ibn Hisham al-Sirah al-Nawawi, and this is a 6-volume. This is a 6-volume set. Hang on, let me see here. I believe it's a 6-volume set. I'm trying to get confirmation if it's a 6-volume. Yep, it's a 6-volume set where it talks about the Prophet Muhammad's life from the beginning to the end. So, okay, so I found a brief introduction to Ibn Ishaq, or Ibn Hisham, so I'll read it. This is found in Tariq Ramadan's book, In the Footsteps of the Prophet, by Tariq Ramadan, page 218. He says, Ibn Hisham, 828 CE, after Hijrah 213, is the author of the first account of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, which has come down to us as Al-Sirah al-Nawawi, the Prophet's life. This is considered the authoritative work on the subject. Ibn Hisham selected, reproduced, elaborated on, and commented on the facts reported by Ibn Ishaq, who died in 767 CE, 150 after Hijrah, in an earlier work that is now lost. So Ibn Ishaq's work is lost anyways. It's not, there's no like autograph, or there's no handwritten manuscript of Ibn Ishaq's work. It's lost anyways. the quotation is from Al-Sirah al-Nawawi. So basically, what Tariq Ramadan is saying is that Ibn Hisham is a authoritative work on the subject, or as a authoritative work on the Prophet Muhammad's life. And he says that Ibn Hisham selected, reproduced, elaborated on, and commented on the facts reported by Ibn Ishaq. So basically, Ibn Hisham edited Ibn Ishaq's work, and he took out a lot of the fabricated or weak traditions found in there. And again, Ibn Hisham is a 6-volume set available in Arabic, but you can find important quotations of it in this book, in the life of the Prophet, lessons from the life of Muhammad by Tariq Ramadan. So I recommend buying this book. So what's the problem with Al-Waqidi and Ibn Sa'd? The problem with Al-Waqidi and Ibn Sa'd is that Al-Waqidi. Well, let's go to Al-Waqidi first. Al-Waqidi was a known liar. He wasn't known to tell authoritative. He wasn't known to say correct things about the Prophet Muhammad. And I'll give some quotes right now. For example, the killing of Abu Afaq. This is found in Ibn Sa'd, volume 1, page 32. However, because Al-Waqidi was the narrator, this story becomes inauthentic. And there's other stories, but let me just quote some scholars who have said that Al-Waqidi is not early Muslim scholars who said that Al-Waqidi is not a authentic. It's not an authentic source. I can find the quotations here. So basically, there are several critics of Al-Waqidi, early Muslim critics of Al-Waqidi. For example, Al-Shafi said that the books of Al-Waqidi are heaps of lies. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, this is found in Ibn Abi Hatim, volume 4, part 1, page 21. Ahmad ibn Hanbal said that Al-Waqidi is a liar, and Al-Dahabi Mazan, volume 3, page 110. Al-Bukhari never wrote down anything from Al-Waqidi. This found in Al-Dahabi Mazan, volume 3, page 110. And Yahya ibn Madan said that Al-Waqidi is worthless. He's a liar. All of his traditions are fabrications. This found in Ibn Abi Hatim, volume 4, page 21. And Abu Dawood also said that Al-Waqidi's books are filled with lies. According to Ibn Hajar Talib, volume 9, page 366, number 604. So there are many early Muslim scholars and classical Muslim scholars who have said that Al-Waqidi's books and stories and narrations are not authentic. They're fabricated. They're fabricated traditions. So what's the issue with Ibn Sa'd? The problem with Ibn Sa'd is he would quote a lot from Al-Waqidi. That makes Ibn Sa'd's narrations automatically not authentic anyways, because he would quote from a known liar. And another issue is that most of the time Ibn Sa'd didn't provide correct chains of transmissions going back to either the companions or the Prophet Muhammad himself. So that makes Ibn Sa'd's works not authoritative. Ibn Sa'd wrote 8 volumes, I believe, 8 volumes, but volume 1 and volume 2 talk about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. So that's why Ibn Sa'd is considered a weak source. He's not considered a authentic or reliable source to begin with. The 4th source was Al-Tabari. And so I got Al-Tabari's books right here. Well, I got volume 1 and volume 6. So basically, like I said in several other videos, if you read Al-Tabari's book, if you read the beginning of Al-Tabari's book, if you read Al-Tabari volume 1, if you read Al-Tabari volume 1, page 170 to 171, Al-Tabari warns people that his books are filled with weak and inauthentic narrations, and he's blaming the fault of the transmitter or the sources. He's blaming his sources. He's not blaming other people. He's just blaming his sources or he's not blaming himself, he's blaming his sources for giving him false information. So Al-Tabari didn't do any fact checking. He didn't see if a story is authentic or not authentic. Again, this is found in Al-Tabari, volume 1, page 170 to 171. So Al-Tabari warns people that his books are filled with weak, inauthentic narrations, and the reader has to do their own investigation to see whether what they're quoting is correct or not. And again, this is found in the History of Al-Tabari, volume 6 too. I have, if you read the translator's foreword, they even say that the material. The material used by historians like Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, were subject to various limitations imposed by the general intellect outlook of their time. And then it further says, and this is found in page 25, it says, to suggest, however, that the whole corpus of material found in the historians was invented several generations after the events is ludicrous when one becomes aware of the vastness of this corpus. So basically what they were doing is they were incorporating a lot of stories that were already circulating, either orally or written, into their works, but they weren't fact-checking those sources to begin with. Not everybody was honest in the first 150 years of Islam, or in the first 180 years of Islam. So those early Muslim books, or those early Muslim stories about the Prophet Muhammad and his companions and his family and stuff like that, there were false stories circulating, and there were true stories circulating. So basically, the Isnad was also established during the time of Al-Tabari. For example, if we read the translator's foreword on page 23, it says Joseph Scat regarded what he called a family Isnad as an invention to give an appearance of authenticity to Hadith where there was no proper Isnad. And there seems to be no reason why it should apply to historical anecdotes, especially when there is incidents. Let me remember. So basically, what this person is saying is that there was a isnad. There was a isnad before Al-Tabari wrote down anything, and this is not. But what this translator failed to mention is that this isnad was used to not only verify legal stories, legal rulings in Islam, but it was also used to establish whether some stories were authentic or not authentic. So again, this is basically an Orientalist that wrote this. It's translated and annotated by Montgomery Watt. So Montgomery Watt was an Orientalist, and W.V. McDonald. So basically, they didn't do any kind of proper research here. They were just spitting out the information without doing any kind of fact checking for the information. So basically, we have to. So basically, what was historians like Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, what were they good for? They were good for putting the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order. Prophet Muhammad's life, they put a proper timeline, or they put the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order. They put the stories of the Prophet Muhammad in chronological orders, in the stories of Abu Bakr, Uthman, and the disciples and the early Muslims in chronological order. So Muhammad in the early Muslims' life was put in chronological order because of Al-Tabari. That doesn't mean that the stories are authentic anyways, because every story needs to have proper sources to verify whether that story is authentic or not. And most of the time, people like Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari didn't provide any kind of sources, or they provided sources that didn't have full chain of transmission links going back to the Prophet Muhammad or his disciples or his companions. So that makes the whole stories spurious and not authentic. So I hope this clarifies the question. I think not everything in Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari is false. I don't think so. I think what Ibn Hisham did was he took out a lot of false stories about the Prophet Muhammad and Ibn Ishaq's work, but Ibn Ishaq was the first person to put the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order, or put the Hadith or stories of Prophet Muhammad in the early Muslims in chronological order. Because if you read Hadith, if you read Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, Al-Nisa, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, etc. These are just Hadith that just randomly tell stories about Prophet Muhammad. They don't put his life in chronological order. Ibn Ishaq put the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order, and so did the other people. So did Ibn Sad, and so did Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari also put the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order. That doesn't mean that the stories that Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari were saying are authentic, because they didn't do any fact checking, or they didn't see whether they didn't do any fact checking to see whether their stories are authentic or not. As for the claim that the Isnad came, 200 years after, by the time of Sahih al-Bukhari, that's absolutely false. The Isnad was established during the times of Abu Bakr and Umar and Khattab, and the Isnad was used by the first three generations of Muslims. And the Prophet Muhammad said, the first three generations of Muslims are the best of believers. So, the chains of transmission, but not always were Muslims successful in either preserving early Hadith books, or preserving accurate chains of transmission going back to the Prophet Muhammad. So again, the whole Isnad and the whole Hadith issue was further established in this book. In this book, Studies in Hadith Methodology and Literature, Mustafa al-Azami talks about where the Isnad came from, where fact-checking sources came from, where early Hadith books came from, etc., etc. He says this on page. He talks about this on page. So basically, he talks about this on page 33 to from page 32 to page 45. He talks about where the Isnad came from, and how to verify whether a Isnad or a chain of transmission goes back to the Prophet Muhammad or his disciples or not. Then he talks about how specific Isnads or specific chains of transmission go all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad. He gives like diagrams. He gives like this diagram, or this graph. This graph talking about how the chains of transmission go all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, from early times to later times. Then he says Isnad and its impact on classification of Hadith. Is where he talks about how Hadith, or how stories and sayings of Prophet Muhammad are graded, whether they're authentic or not. Then let's see. Then he talks about how the Hadith were recording of Hadith in the life of the Prophet and the companions. This is found on chapter 4 of this book, page 25 through 25 to 31. Again, this is a short book, but this is a really good book to understand how Hadith came, and things like that, and how the Hadith, for example, he says, I'll give you some examples. He says that Ibn Abbas transmitted 1,660 Hadith. Ibn Masud translated 748 Hadith. Anas bin Malik transmitted 2,286 Hadith. So basically, the people who lived during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, who walked and talked with the Prophet Muhammad, wrote down and preserved Hadith. For example, Umar ibn Khattab narrated 537 Hadith. The fourth Caliph, Ali ibn Abu Talib, recorded 536 Hadith, etc., etc. So he gives he gives the names of companions, or the disciples who transmitted Hadith. So basically, early, and then hang on 1 second. He says chapter 3, carrying of knowledge of Hadith. So he talks about how the Hadith were taught and recorded. Then he talks about how the Hadith, how the companions of the Prophet Muhammad learned Hadith and things like that. The Prophet in his Hadith teachings, learnings, and diffusions. So basically, the disciples of Prophet Muhammad had verbal teachings, written mediums, practical transmission. Uh, so basically, he talks about how the Hadith was preserved and how, like what happened to early Hadith books. He talks about that on page 78. So let me quickly read what he says here. He says that. He says, I'm trying to find. He says, what happened to the earlier Hadith? He says, I have mentioned earlier that thousands and hundreds and thousands of books of Hadith were in circulation in the 1st and 2nd century. So during the time of the Prophet Muhammad and after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, there are many Hadith books circulating. Only a very small amount of this Hadith literature has survived. It could be said that either what I have described is totally wrong, or these books were in existence at some times but were lost later. This second hypothesis raises another problem. Um, as a matter of fact, my position is precise and correct. These books were not destroyed nor did they perish, but they were absorbed into the work of later authors. So basically, these early Hadith books by Ibn Abbas, Ibn Masud, all this stuff, all these early Hadith books, they were absorbed by people like Ibn Ishaq, Al-Tabari, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. They were absorbed into these later books. When the encyclopedia type books were produced, scholars did not feel the necessity to keep the early books or booklets, and so slowly they disappeared. To explain this point, I've described the method of quotations in early days, which would prove my point. Again, this is found in Studies in Hadith Methodology and Literature, page 74 to page 75. So basically, there were hundreds of Hadith books circulating already during the time of the Prophet Muhammad and after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and these books were circulated. These books were absorbed by other scholars like Ibn Ishaq, Al-Tabari, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, Al-Nisa, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, etc., etc. So basically, I hope this clarifies, or this explains why the early sources of Islam aren't authentic, and why people like Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim are more authentic, because Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari always provided chains of transmission for their hadith. Now Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are humans. Humans are infallible, right? Humans aren't God. Humans can make mistakes. So although Sahih Bukhari was very careful and very accurate in collecting the life of the Prophet Muhammad, sometimes Sahih al-Bukhari recorded false hadith about the Prophet Muhammad. For example, the suicide of the Prophet Muhammad has been proven to be a false hadith found in Sahih Bukhari and things like that. Sahih Muslim also has some weak hadith in there and things like that. So when Muslims are saying Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari are the most authentic books to learn about the Prophet Muhammad, they're only talking about the authentic chains of transmission in those books. There are some hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim which are not authentic, but that's a later topic for another day. So I hope this clarifies. I hope this answers Jesus Christ is not God's a question about the early sources of Islam and why they're generally not reliable or not authentic. The only thing the early sources of Islam did, like Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, is they put the Prophet Muhammad's life in chronological order. But just because you put something in chronological order, that doesn't mean that your stories in those orders are correct or authentic. It just means you put his life in chronological order. That's it. That doesn't mean that what you're writing or what you're collecting is authentic. So I hope that clarifies the question, or that answers the question. Stay tuned. A lot more videos are up ahead. Thanks.